My name is Nik Molnar. I'm from New York City. I've been doing software development, particularly web development, for about 17 years. And I'm extremely lucky to be called a Microsoft MVP and to be sponsored by Redgate to work on Glibs full-time. And part of the deal with that is I get to go to conferences and user groups like this and meet awesome people like you guys. When I told my family and friends that I was going to Scotland, I got a couple of warnings from them. This is my first time to your fair country. All I know about your country is what I've seen in Braveheart and Brave. So Brave's good. There's a Mumford & Sons song in that, so I'm all about it. But they warned me about your accent and how I wouldn't be able to understand anything that you say. And I did meet Gary once before, so I thought that was probably going to be true. I met him at NDC. I had no clue what we talked about for all of lunch. I said, "Good job, Gary." But to be honest, your accents haven't been that bad. Instead, what's really pissed me off is what you guys call food. Because, as I mentioned, I'm American. So you guys know a couple of things about me right out of the gate. One, I'm fat and I like to eat, as all Americans are. But when I look at a menu and I see things like this, aubergine, guys, that's eggplant. I see these wonderful things, all desserts, cakes, ice cream, pudding. No, guys, come on. We have pudding. It's something different. Bill Cosby sells it. This is called desserts. Courgettes? No. Zucchini. It's really difficult to order here. And then you guys start throwing me curveballs. I see this. This is bread, guys, all right? Are you tracking me? Rocket? No. Arugula. What the hell is going on here? This is called sausage. You're just having a piss with me. And then last night, at the end of our meal, are you kidding me? That's not going to even happen. I'm not even going to go. No, I'm not going to go. We would never even put something like that in our mouth. Not that there's anything wrong with that. Just not the way I roll. Anyway, so like I said, I've been doing it. That was it. That was the last segment. I wrote that joke in the shower last night. That's all you get. It's going to be pretty boring from here on out. Like I said, I've been a web developer for 17 years, but as a web developer, I consider myself a software developer, which means that I do typing. As my dad says, I wiggle my fingers for a living. That's exactly what I do. And when it comes time to like plug a machine in or configure IIS or set up SQL Server, I let some sysops guy go into the cold closet in the back room and he takes care of that. And I've never really worried about that before. But Windows Azure is starting to change that for me. The whole DevOps movement is making me have to grapple with this whole like two worlds coming together, the dev and the ops, and I'm not really an ops guy. But like I said, I'm kind of being pushed into it. So that's what I want to talk about a little bit tonight. And so what really kind of made me take the first step and feel comfortable doing that is Azure websites. Now, as you know, how many people here have used Azure websites before? Okay, about half the room. You've probably heard about Azure if you do any .NET development at all. Azure is this huge monolithic thing. I have other friends who are MVPs in Azure, and I'll take two of them that have never met each other and be like, "Hey, Randy, meet Mike. You're both Azure MVPs. You must have a lot to talk about." And they're like, "Hi, I do storage." She's like, "Hi, I do traffic manager." And then that's it. They have nothing to talk about. Because they specialize in an area that never interacts with the other area. And so I'm kind of that way with websites. I really care about websites, but if somebody comes up to me and asks me about how Active Directory integration works, I say, go talk to somebody else. That's not me. Now, some of you did not raise your hand. Some of you have not seen websites before. So I want to really quickly get up and running with a website so you can see the basics so we're all on the same page and we'll move forward from there. Now, the entire world of Azure surrounds the idea of the Azure Portal. You can find that portal at portal.azure.com and it looks like this. This is the brand new one. This one came out 6 to 8 weeks ago, I'd say, and it's really fancy and Microsoft's super excited about it. It has some interesting things that you can do, like you get aliens that appear for no random reason, and Journeys has aliens too, and they can bill me. The billing works. Good to know, guys. The billing works. There's this concept of something called blades. So when you click on one of these tiles, kind of the Windows 8 Metro thing, you get this blade, that's this thing that popped up here on the right is called, and if I drill down, I get another blade, and if I drill down again, I get another blade, and so this is amazing. I get to do horizontal scrolling for a living. That's my favorite. So this is the portal. It is in preview mode right now, which basically means it's a beta, and as such, it kind of sucks. Theoretically, I could do this whole talk in this portal, but the portal I find to be very slow. They haven't done any optimizations around it yet. So I'm going to kill the new portal, and we're going to use the old portal, because it's just a little bit faster, and I want to get out of your way of beer as quickly as possible. Now, what am I saying? Whiskey, right? You guys just all drink whiskey every night. That's how Americans think about Scottish people. Anyway, so this is the old portal, what is still kind of current, but will be going away at some point, and it's at manage.windowsazure.com. And I'm looking at websites. And I have a couple of websites here. I have one called Signatory. That's a website, an open source website that I have called signatory.io as the URL. That's for managing contributor license agreements for open source projects against GitHub. I have another one here called Bluntly, which is a side project that I screw around with. GetGlimpse.com, which Anthony showed you earlier, is actually an Azure website, but it's on a different subscription, so you can't see it. But this is my real honest-to-God account right here that you're looking at. So don't let me screw it up. We're going to add a new website. So I'm going to say new, compute, website. I'm going to do a custom create here. And we need a URL. So let's try UK demo. It's available. Great. And we're going to create a new SQL database to go along with that. Now I have to give a connection string name here. I already have code that I'm going to deploy for this website, and in that web config file, it's looking for a connection string called data context. So I'm just going to reuse that to save a little bit of time so I don't have to change it later. And we're going to publish that from source control. Next, I need to do some stuff to set up SQL Server. Microsoft does a great job naming this server, UK demo. That makes sense. AOKZ3, I don't know what the hell that's all about. So we're going to change the name here to _DB. And I'm going to put that on a new SQL Server. We'll give my login information, my super secret password. I'm creating a new account here. Next. Nope. And I'm going to deploy the code from GitHub. I have a lot of code up at GitHub, but you can see here I could use Code Collector, Bitbucket, or whatever. So we'll say GitHub. Next, you'll see a pop-up window come up. There, it's there. It should disappear pretty quickly. That was Azure checking my GitHub account, which I'm already logged into on this browser, and it came back. And so now I have a list of all of my repositories. You'll see the first and most important repository I have was one called Courtesy Flush. I guess a couple of people do courtesy flushes. The rest of you probably need to ask the guys who are laughing what that's all about. It's about flushing HTTP response streams early. You guys, get your heads out of the gutter. So I have a whole bunch of different repositories up here, including my Glimpse ones, because I'm in the Glimpse organization. And I have code for all of my talks and presentations that I give. So talk for Website Secrets Exposed. That's my current presentation that I'm giving you, so if you guys want to look at these slides or any of the demos, all that code's already available there. I'm actually going to deploy the website from this other talk called Full Stack Web Performance. I talk a lot about web performance in general, and I've built a website for that talk, and to save time, I'm just going to redeploy that website. It's on the master branch. Okay, good to go. And you can see that UK demo is here, and it's being created. So this should take somewhere between 15 and 45 seconds in general. So we're going to let that go. So what's happening at this point is Azure is creating some machine somewhere, I think I said in the East Coast, and it's putting IIS on that machine, and it's creating a SQL Server box, and a SQL Server database called UKDemo_DB on it, and it's grabbing all of my code from GitHub, and it's moving it onto that box, and it's building it. If I come in here, you'll see I'll go to these deployments. Bump the font size up a little bit here for you guys. You can see here that it's fetching the changes from GitHub. So while that's happening, it's going to take a little while to copy all that over. We're going to do a couple of things I like to configure. So I'll come over to this configuration tab, and I have the option to, oh, there we go, come on, to turn on application logging. So this is app logging. This isn't like IIS logging or some special operating system logging. This is the logging that I put into my application using system.diagnostics.trace or maybe nlog or log4net, and we're going to make that logging level verbose. You can see here that I can actually trace those files right to disk, and it's going to keep them around for 12 hours. This session should be done right before the 12-hour mark, so that will keep the data around long enough. These two guys left. Everybody else gave me like a, oh my gosh, I've got to get out of here, these crazy Americans. I could have also kept them around longer by putting them on into blob storage, but another talk, another time, so we won't worry about that. I'll go ahead and hit save. All right, and let's check and see how our deployment's doing. Azure is really funky with these huge sizes. Deployments. Okay, cool. After deployment, we're good to go. I'm going to go to the dashboard, and I'll have a URL that will point me to my website, so this ukdemo.azurewebsites.net. Let's open it up. The first time I'm launching the website, just like all .NET, ASP.NET code, it's JITting. This is an MVC application. This uses MV Framework and MV Framework migrations. So that database that was created, migrations, was going through and automatically creating tables and inserting all of the data into those tables. And then it shows you the thing that I'm super passionate about, the other thing, after food, baseball. I live in New York, but I don't root for the New York Yankees. I root for the Miami Marlins, who are currently in a death match with the #1 team in the league, the Washington Nationals, tied 1-1. I know you care, that's why I tell you. Aberdeen is just crazy about baseball. No, so instead of making a baseball website that you would despise, I made one that I thought maybe you'd have a chance of liking. So these are the mascots of minor league baseball. There's 160 minor league baseball teams in the United States. They all have a mascot, and this website is dedicated to them. Every year, the mascots have a contest called Mascot Mania. It's basically the Commonwealth Games of pie throwing. And last year, Lucille won. And so you can come through here, we can see all the different people who were finalists in the games. Some of my favorites are in here, like this guy. His name is Jalapeno. He's a half jalapeno, half baseball bat. That's my two loves put together as one. This guy is awesome. There's some other very American ones, like Roscoe the P-Ray Rooster. He's not even at a baseball field, but anytime we can throw a little extra violence in, we're big fans of that. So that's this website, and that is basically a quick overview. You can see in about 2 minutes, I was able to get a website up and running on IIS using SQL Server from code at GitHub, and it was all pretty simple just by filling out a wizard. Now, I'm talking all about Azure websites, and if you've heard anything about Azure, hey, Gary, I forgot to start my timer, so when I need to shut up, shoot an arrow at me, like the girl from Brave. Brave jokes don't go over well here. I guess I'm the only one that likes animated chicks. So you might have heard of these things called web roles, and web roles are kind of like the grandfather's equivalent of running websites in Azure. They are actually more powerful, so you can do things like have dedicated IP addresses, and you can open up different TCP UDP ports, and have network isolation, and all of these things that operations guys really care about, but that scare me. I'm like, TCP UDP, can I buy a vowel? I don't know what the hell that means. A website, though, is a little bit better, I would say, for somebody like me who thinks of themselves as a developer. So all of the operations things like deployments have been moved into a place that I'm comfortable with, which is my source control. So I can make a change in source, hit push, and I'm going to get deployment continuously. I have the ability to do rollbacks. There's some other options like backups and web jobs that I'm not going to cover today. But basically, over time, things that are up here move down here, and they never move new things into here, because I think Microsoft wants to move people away from this. That's not a fact, but that's just kind of my feeling. We're going to focus on the bottom half of this slide. So what is an Azure website? Truth be told, that after I took some time to dig into this, Azure websites really aren't that magical. They seem cool, and they have some snazzy UI and nice developer features, but at the end of the day, it's infrastructure that your ops guys that you work with at work, or maybe you yourself are comfortable with, right? At the end of the day, it's Windows Server running on the cloud. That server is running a version of .NET, It's running IIS 8, and that IIS 8 has a module installed in it called Application Request Routing, ARR. Now, I mentioned that it's running .NET. All of Azure Websites is built on top of .NET. That does not mean you can only use .NET code. So my Mascots website could have been built in PHP, or Node, or Java, or Python. You can deploy any type of code that you want to. I'm a .NET guy, so I'm using .NET. The one thing that is kind of magical about Azure Websites is this layer called Kudu. Kudu is an open source project built by members of the Azure/ASP.NET team, and it's the piece that makes everything happen and makes me happy as a developer. It's keeping track of changes in source control and deploying them, and it works with all these different source control providers, right? So you have like the real options, right, like Bitbucket and GitHub, and then you have other options like Codeplex and Dropbox. And why Dropbox is considered source control, I don't know, but if you're using Dropbox as source control, you should leave the room right now because you have other things to learn before this session. That's actually kind of funny, but the first version of Glimpse was built with Dropbox as source control. So just to prove that there's nothing really special about Windows Azure Websites, I'm going to use a familiar tool, Internet Information Services Manager. And this is exactly how you would manage IIS on your machine or in your environment at work. And so to do that, I'm going to copy the URL to our website. And you can see here that I already have a connection back to my local SQL server, series9/Nik, that's the name of my machine. I'm going to go ahead and say connect to a site, and I need to type in the name of a server. So I don't need this home champions part, and I don't need this. And let me, whoa, that's not what I wanted to do. Is that a little bit better for you guys to see? Yeah, okay, great. Now, ukdemo.azurewebsites.net is not actually the real name of the server, so we have to do a little bit of manipulation, but we're mostly there. First of all, we need to go to port 443, because it's going to be a secure connection. And the next thing we need to do is add in .scm. Now don't worry about what the SCM stands for, we're going to cover that in a little bit, but just know that you need to do these two things. Now the name of my site was ukdemo. Let's see if I can zoom out a little bit, there we go. I'm going to come down here, blindly, find the next button, move up here, I have to put in a username, I have to put in my password, so it's all authenticated, press next, we're connecting. I have to give it a connection name. This is arbitrary. I'll just stick with the default. Finish. And now you can see that I have UK demo added as an option. I'm connected to Azure in the cloud with the IIS manager. I'm going to get out of this. And so I can prove that if I open up application settings, you can see here I have a bunch of app settings. These are from my web config file. These are all the standard ones that NBC adds in there. Remember I told you that my Mascot site is an NBC site. Let's go ahead and make a change to something though. I'm going to do something fast. I'm going to set up an HTTP redirect. So anytime somebody wants to hit my site, we will go to Google, not Goggle, google.com. I'll apply that change. Now if I come back into my site and I try to go to the home page, you'll see I get redirected to Google. So I'm proving the point that IIS, standard IIS manager, I'm changing the website. Let's go ahead and undo that change, apply, and if I go back, now I try to go to the home page, it's going to take a second to JIT, but then we should be good to go. And proof, there we go. Okay, so IIS connects to Azure Websites, not that special. The thing that was special, the magical piece that I told you about, is this thing called Kudu. What is Kudu, you ask? This is a Kudu. It's basically a souped up goat that I wouldn't want to screw around with if I saw it in a field. He looks pretty gnarly, but that's the animal that Kudu is named after. I have no clue why. Kudu is interesting because it's a service, but it's not a service the way most of us think of services. When we think of a service, I think of web API, and I put something up into the cloud, whatever that is, and lots of different users and companies and partners will all connect to the same service, and they'll use it to get some resources or some data or something like that. But that kind of a service is called a multi-tenant web service. Kudu is a single tenant web service, which means that there's really only one user or one set of users for each website. So let me say it in a different way. When I created that UK demo site, my code got deployed there. But another chunk of code, which is Kudu, got deployed there as well. It's kind of a buddy site. And so for every single website that ever gets created, Kudu gets deployed there. So there's lots of instances of Kudu running all over the place. Now this is interesting because of the single tenant nature of Kudu, the architecture is such that it runs on the same process as your website. Theoretically, they can change that, but as of right now, that's the truth. Which means that all the quotas that you have in Azure, like how much CPU you're using, or how much disk space or memory that you've used up, anything that you're doing in Kudu, you are charging back to yourself, right? So any space that Kudu is taking is space that's taking up in your website. So you kind of have to be careful with that, although I've never really seen a problem because the value is there for what Kudu does. I also want to look into what Kudu specifically does, and I like to think of Kudu as the simplest continuous integration server ever. And the reason why this analogy came to my mind is 8 or 9 years ago, I used a continuous integration server called cruisecontrol.net. Anybody ever used cruisecontrol.net? Okay. So I don't know how politically incorrect I'm allowed to be in Scotland, so I'm just going for it. Gray hairs raise their hands. That one gentleman was very handsome, though. I will point that out. Man, I'm burying myself. Cruise control was awesome, but it was very configuration heavy. You had to jump into some XML. There wasn't any XML editor. It was nothing like TeamCity or Travis is today, but it did its job. I feel like Kudu is kind of there. It's not meant to be a continuous integration server, but if you think of it in that way, it makes a lot of sense as to what it does. So the first thing that Kudu does in its 4-step process is it connects to your source control system, right? And so we already looked at some of the different ones that it connects to. Once it notices that there's a change or has been notified of a change, it copies all the files over via whatever mechanism, and it will build your code. Now, it will build if it's Java or .NET or a platform that has a build step. If you're talking about PHP or Node, there's not going to be a build, so this step will just get skipped. Whatever assets it has after the build step, it will then copy them. Pretty simply, usually it's going to drop it into the www root, which is the directory that IIS serves files up for to make a website. And then the last of the 4 steps is it will do post actions. There's 2 forms of post actions that it does. The first one is probably good for guys who are a little bit more oppy on the DevOps side. It will allow you to run PowerShell or batch scripts. And then the second one is something that I'm a bit more comfortable with, which is a webhook. So let's look into what these things are and how you can use them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come into Azure here, the portal, and I'm going to copy this FTP address. Oh, come on. I can do it! There we go. Copy. A lot of people don't realize that Windows Explorer actually is an FTP client in and of itself. So I just opened up Explorer. I'm going to paste in that FTP address and hit enter. That just saves me time from downloading something like FileZilla. I have to authenticate. So let me type in my credentials again. Enter. And now I've FTP'd into where the files are stored for my website. So I can dig into site. I can dig into www root, and here you can see here's my packages config, my web config, the different views that make up my application are in here, view start, etc., etc. There's also log files I can look at. This is really good if you need to see if there's a problem going on. You can go look at your log files here. The other thing that's inside of this site directory that is interesting is deployments. So Kudu keeps track of everything that it's doing with log files, and it writes those log files out to this deployments directory. But what I want to go do is dig into this tools directory. And I'm going to create a new folder called post deployment actions. Great. Now, I'm going to open up Notepad, and we're going to just do something really simple. We'll echo hello Aberdeen. And we will just simply call this echo.bat. Save that, close. I'll jam that over there on the left. We're going to take echo.bat and we're going to drop it into my post-deployment actions. Great. So I just wrote a simple batch file. I used the FTP client to drop this file somewhere inside of my Azure website. What will happen now, if I go back into the portal and I go to deployments, I'm just going to redeploy the deployment that I made, but obviously I could change some code and push it to GitHub. Save time, I'll just hit redeploy. Yep, I'm sure I want to redeploy, thank you. Kudu will realize that I just dropped that batch file there. And when it's finished doing those first 3 steps that I showed you, the SCM, the build, and the copy, it will run that batch file. So as soon as this is done deploying, I can come in here, I can view the log, and you'll see that it executed echo.bat and we have the hello Aberdeen plugin. Now, that doesn't help you guys. I did a cheap party trick, no big deal. Obviously here you would want to do things that you might do after deployment. So you might send static files over to a CDN in this step. You might optimize images, minify CSS and JavaScript, prime some caches, things like that. What's interesting is you can have lots of these scripts. And so I just listed off 5 examples, and you might want all of those. And so for each one of those examples, you'd create a separate script, probably, and Kudu will run them all in order, so ASCII sorted order. And if one of them fails, it will just break the chain, and it will tell you, okay, I'm not going to run the next 3 scripts because the second one broke. And so this is a nice way that you can kind of chain things together. Like I said, I'm not the ops guy, so this whole idea of writing batch scripts, that's for the birds. For me, instead, I like this idea of webhooks. How many here have heard of webhooks or know what a webhook is? Okay, cool. Chance for you guys, for me to teach you guys something. A webhook is the opposite of a web API. And I don't mean web API as in the name of the Microsoft Framework Web API. I mean a SOAP or REST endpoint that we use to get data, right? If I'm the consumer of a web service or a web API, I say, hey service, I need data, can you give it to me? And I ask and I receive. That's a web API. A web hook is almost the exact opposite. I am a server and I have data, and instead you as a consumer tell me, when something changes, let me know. So the first one is pull. Web hooks are push. When an event happens on my server, I'm going to tell you about it. This happens very simply. Essentially, the consumer says, here's a URL that I want you to call when something happens, and me as the server calls that URL to let them know that this thing has happened. The webhooks have been around for a long time. People have used them. They just didn't have this name. This name was given probably 6 to 8 years ago by a guy named Jeff Lindsay in San Francisco. And if you go to webhooks.org, you can watch the video where he describes this. And my favorite quote from the video is he tells you that webhooks are so simple that you'll think they're stupid. Which is true. They're quite simple. But the reason why I like webhooks is because it's just using very fundamental low-level HTTP, and we're comfortable with that as web developers, so we can use that to do cool things. So I'm going to show you an example. I'm going to use this application called Zapier. Zapier, I like to think of as programming my mother can do. It's all very draggy-droppy. You take an input from one thing, you pipe it to the output of another thing, where those things are web services. I'm seeing a lot of nods, shaking heads. Everybody knows what Zapier is? Cool. What I want to do is I want to set it up so whenever there's a deployment, I get a text message on my phone. Unfortunately, I don't have a SIM that works here in Scotland, so I'm not going to be able to show you that. I have that set up for my side project. So this is that Gluttly application that I showed you. And literally, I improved the code coverage, and that got deployed, and it was a successful deployment. And I like to include a hyperlink because it's a mobile web application. So I do a deployment. A minute or two later, after I actually have unit tests running on this too, which we'll talk about in a bit. I do the deployment. I get the alert, I hit a button, and boom, I'm looking at the website that just got deployed, or I'm finding out that it didn't get deployed. Can't do the text, so instead we're gonna send off a tweet. To do that, I'll hit Make New Zap. We'll go through this rather quickly since many of you know about Zapier. And I have to choose a trigger. The trigger is essentially the input. If I do a search for Azure, Azure Websites is there because the Azure Website team has worked with Zapier to make a nice experience here. There's a couple of things that I can trigger on. We're going to do a new website deployment. Now, when that happens, what do I want to do? I already told you I wanted to send a tweet, so we'll do a search for Twitter and create a tweet. Continue. Now, we have to connect Zapier to my Azure website. And you can see that I already have one in there for Gluttly, but let's connect to a different website. We want to connect to the UK demo. And it asks here for a deployment trigger URL. All right, what is that, you might ask? So we're going to come over here to the portal. I'm going to try to close this thing. There we go. I'm going to come into configure again. Now if we scroll down inside of configure, I have a deployment trigger URL. So let me copy that. We'll paste it into Zapier. Say continue. It's working. It's testing for problems. Boom, it connected. My account is working. Okay, great. Continue. I'm going to connect it to my Twitter account, which is NickMD23. That's me with my very friendly puppet. Continue. I can do some filtering here, but I don't want to do any filtering. I want to know about all notifications, so that's fine. Continue. And now I can type in a message. So let's say test from Aberdeen. And what's cool about Zapier is not only can I type in static, literal text, but I can have variable placeholders. So I'm going to insert a field. And so Zapier is going off to Azure to figure out what dynamic things I can access. And you can see here that I have things like the message, which is my commit message, who the author was, the time, etc., etc. I'm going to use the message, press continue, get this thing set up, and I give it a name. We'll call this UK demo. That's a name of what they call a zap, the connection between the input and the output. Turn it on. Okay, great, it's set up. Azure to Twitter on. So I'll come back into here. We'll go to deployments again. My batch script is still going to run. That's fine. This is two completely different features of Kudu, really. Yep, go ahead and run that. It's deploying. As soon as the deployment finishes, it should happen fairly quickly because there's no changes to the repository, nothing for it to download. There we go, active deployment. So now it's pushed out some information to Zapier. Zapier is going to have to take a second to process that. It will send out a tweet here. Let me press refresh and see if we have a new tweet. Not yet. We'll give it a couple more seconds. Oh, no, go away. I don't care about that. Some interesting things for you guys to ponder. What if soy milk is just milk announcing itself in Spanish? Or this is kind of cool. I'm pretty excited to be here, so look at this, guys. I bought a little patch for Aberdeen. I'm going to have my wife sew it to the inside of my bag, keep track of all the places I've spoken. So boom, you guys are part of my life forever. Let me go ahead and refresh this again. We should see this tweet coming through. Usually takes 30 to 45 seconds. Boom, there you go. Test for Aberdeen, slide tweaks. And just like that, with me doing no programming, I'm getting this really dynamic behavior, which is quite cool. I'm going to go ahead and delete that tweet. Oh, man. This is Dashlane. Dashlane is not part of the demo, but it's a freebie you guys get. It's a cool password manager. And now I can delete that tweet since I logged in. Okay, thank you, Twitter and Zapier. Let's move on with the demo. So this is Kudu, and this is what it does by default, but people often ask me, well, that's cool, but what if I need something more specific or I need to change it? What are the configuration points, or is it configurable at all? And the answer is yes and yes. Highly configurable, and you can configure every single step. And there's different ways that you can do this. So the way the source is acquired, you can change by putting settings literally in your web config and app settings, or going into the portal and configuration and adding app settings. And here's the ones that I think that are a little bit more interesting. There's links at the end with documentation to find out all of the settings that you can use. But for example, you can set the target path of where it should be writing the repository files to if you need to change that for some reason. Or you can say that it's not actually a repository. You can just have files on some web server somewhere for it to grab, which is how it works with Dropbox. By default, Dropbox is set to true. There is no repository. Now, the next step up that you can do is you can include an INI file inside of the root of your repository that Kudu will find to do certain things and change settings. So for example, here's this SCM post-deployment actions path. Now earlier when we added echo.bat, I made a special directory as deployments/tools/post-deployment actions. And the only way for me to access that was to FTP in. Well, that's kind of a pain in the butt. I want to keep echo inside of my source control. So that's fine. I can create this INI file. I can change the directory for Kudu to go and find those batch files and put it to something inside of my source control, which is nice. I can also turn on shallow cloning or disable or enable submodules and do all kinds of interesting things to speed up the copy process when it's moving everything over from Git. And lastly, the most powerful option that you have is to create a deployment script. So essentially, everything that I talked about, all of these things at the top that Kudu does, you can go to Kudu and say, hey, that's cool that you do it, but this is what I want you to do, Kudu. I want you to write down your logic, how you process things, and give me that logic as a script that I can then change and override your logic and do whatever I want to. So that's pretty simple to do. I'm going to come here to the command line. You'll notice that I'm in full stack web performance, which is where I keep that website that we're using for this session. And so I have some files in there. What I've already done is I've installed the Azure tools. You can do this in PowerShell as well. I'm using the node-based tools because I don't like PowerShell because it's blue instead of black. So I'm going to type in Azure site deployment script. This is going to fail, especially because I didn't spell it correctly. Deployment, oh my gosh. Deployment script. I should get a better error. That's a much better error. Okay. The reason why this errors is because Kudu does this itself, essentially, but it uses heuristics on the server by looking at all the different things that are happening to figure out what kind of website you have, if it's Node or PHP or ASP.NET, and find your project file, etc., etc. It doesn't have those heuristics locally for me, so I have to give it a little bit more information. But it's not too bad. The first thing I have to do is tell it that it's an ASP web application. I have to tell it where the project file is for my web app, which is stored in demo/minor league baseball website /minor league baseball.web csproj. So that's my project file for the website. I also have to tell it where my solution is, and that's in demo/demo.solution. If I run that, everything comes back good to go. And now if I look at what's in my directory, you'll see that I have this .deployment file, that's brand new. And I have this deploy.cmd. These are both brand new files. So let's go ahead and look at .deployment. And you'll see that it's very simple. It is a INI file. So this is the INI file that I was telling you about. You can go ahead and put other settings in here if you want to. The setting that it gives you out of the box is something called command. This is the batch file that Kudu will run to do all of its logic. And it gave you deploy.cmd. So let's go ahead and say deploy.cmd. And you can see here, I have the whole thing. This is all the logic that makes Kudu run. It's actually surprisingly efficient, given how much it does and how little there is here. And it's also a little intimidating, but I will say that it's fairly well commented. So you can see there's a bunch of setup here where it's checking to see if variables have been defined, and if not, it will set them. The reason it has to do these checks is because deployment source or deployment target or any of these things that you see, these are settings that you can put in the INI file, and it will rip those settings and put them into the environment so they're available for you. So you don't even have to worry about changing this if you just want to change something small. Let me make this example more explicit. You can see here the first step of what really happens in Kudu is it restores NuGet packages, and then it builds your application. So I could change the way that this thing is built. You can see here it's doing this MS build. I could go and change this logic, or if I wanted to, I could just pass in different build arguments that would get passed into MS build. By default, this is an empty string, but if you want to just tack on a couple of things, no need to reconfigure this file, just make those changes. From there, it does the build, and this is where it does the copy of the files over www root, and then these are a bunch of things for ending and displaying errors. So what you might want to do is run unit tests, which Kudu doesn't do by default. And so I don't want to ever have a deployed website unless it works. So right above that Kudu sync comment that I just showed you, you can go in and put a little bit of code like this in there. And this is code that I actually have running for that Gluttly website that was texting me that I showed you. So the first thing we need to do is we need to build the test project, because Kudu is only interested in the web project. So I go in there and I just build that. And then the next thing I do is I run those tests. And so you can see that I'm using XUnit, and I don't know where XUnit is because I don't know what version I have, and NuGet handles all of that. So I do this little trick where I change directories into xunit.runners star, and this is where the version number normally is. So it's going to get whatever version I have, it's going to grab that, it's going to be the newest one. And then I can run XUnit. And if there's an error from XUnit, I go to that error, and the deployment fails. And I get a text message about it. So that's pretty cool. Now, Kudu does a bunch of other cool things I want to rip through and show you guys. I'm running out of time. So we're going to look at our website here. I'm going to copy it, paste, and I'm going to type in that special thing again, SCM. Now, all of you who raised your hands and said that you played with Azure websites, you actually have this. Every Azure website ships with this .scm buddy site. This is kind of the Kudu interface. You just never knew about it. And it lets you do all kinds of cool things. So I can click on this environment link, and I'm going to see all kinds of information about the environment that's running for the server. So like, for example, I can see that I'm running on a 64-bit system, but not a 64-bit process. Interesting. There's these other tools, like I can download a diagnostics dump and then run that through debugging tools if I have a hang or something like that. I can open up this log stream, and I've now connected to the log streaming service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out Mascots to be its own website, its own window. And on the log streaming service, we're going to move over here. And as I navigate around the website, I clicked on the Appalachian League. And you can see that the trace statement that I had in there popped up in real time. So this is a tail on my logging. And as I browse around, I'm seeing what I'm doing. And so that's really interesting if you're trying to keep track of what your users are doing, or you just need to look at what's happening live on production. We can also come and look at webhooks. So Zapier used this all by itself. It called back in. There you can see Zapier. But if you weren't using Zapier, maybe you wanted to use if this then that, which is Zapier competitor, you can come in here and manually add a webhook or add a webhook to your own system, and your own system would be notified of a deployment. There's a Process Explorer, which is basically the same as the Process Explorer that I have on my machine. I hit Control-Shift-Escape to get that, but you can see that I'm running the W3 WP process. That's the IIS process. I can come in and see all kinds of properties. I can even kill it. I'm going to skip that to move on a little bit more quickly. There's an API available on Kudu, so I can drill in and see here's all the files that are stored, and I get that restfully via JSON. I can drill into the site, drill into www root, drill into script, and I mean this is just all my files. Boom, there's jQuery, and via REST I was able to access all the files that were available. This is really good if you're building some tooling or doing something dynamically. Let's head back. Come on, go faster. And then the last thing I'll show you is there's this Debug Console, and so you can actually get access to PowerShell, and you can run PowerShell commands right on that box. I told you I like black over blue, so I'm going to switch to CMD. And so if I come down here and I type in CDS and hit tab, it does tab completion. So now I've changed directory into site, and you notice that this little HTML representation of my directory structure changed along with the command. I could also just click on something like www root, and you'll notice the command follows along with what I'm doing in the UI. So that is really quickly some cool Kudu stuff. I want to think about skipping some stuff. Everything in Kudu is authenticated. All of that SCM stuff only happened because I logged in. I logged in with my Microsoft account. They changed this recently. You used to not be able to use your Microsoft account. Now you can, so that's a green tick. You also can use your user credentials or your site credentials. If you don't know what those are, ask me or tweet me, and I will fill you in. I'm going to skip that and move on to more interesting things. Next is the way that you can configure Azure. You can use the standard .NET configuration. These are the 3 files that you've always had around, machine.config, webroot.config, and all of your various web configs that are in folders. They all get combined together. From IIS 7 on, there's another configuration file called the application host config. That is available, and that gets merged in at this point. If you're just running locally, you basically have all of this up, but on Azure you have additional overrides. These are the things that you type into the portal that are available. You'll notice that there's transforms available just for your web config, just like you normally have, right? You have web.debug.config and web.release.config where you can use to change your configuration file. It's also available on app host. And so this will probably be the last demo I get to show you guys. But it leads to some really powerful things. So I'm going to look at this file here, outer curve SVG. This is just an SVG file of the outer curve logo, not a big deal. And I'm going to go to, I'm already at www.root, that's great. I'm going to take outer curve, and I'm just going to drag and drop it right on top of this debug console in the background. It kind of works as a nice little FTP client built into the browser because when I drop that file, outer curve is there. Which you would think means that I can now go to outercurve.svg, and technically the file is there, but I get this error message from Azure. That's because IIS, by default, doesn't understand the MIME type that is SVG. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up one directory here, the site, and I'm going to copy an XDT file. I'm going to show you the contents of this file in a second. This is a transform file. I'm going to drop that into my site. I actually need to restart the website, so I will come in to the dashboard. I will press stop to stop the site. I will press start to start the site. So now I've rebooted it. So what Kudu has done is it's seen that XDT file that I just uploaded. It's used that, oh, no, I don't want to delete the site yet. It's used that to transform this app host. So this thing has changed before I ever even got to use it. And because of that change, now, if I refresh, I have to wait for Azure to come all the way back up. Eventually, we will see the logo actually gets served from the browser. And while we wait for that, let me show you what that file looked like. So look like this. It's pretty simple. If you haven't seen XDT files before, you basically define a transform in a different namespace. And so I'm saying that I want to insert this element at this place. I want something called MyMap inside of static content, inside of system web server, inside of my configuration file, and I'm adding a file extension called SVG. If that already exists, it'll ignore it. But if it doesn't, it'll add it. I'm also doing some stuff to compress SVG files. That's a performance optimization. You don't really have to do that. And if I come back and refresh, outer curve logo is not appearing yet, but it should be appearing. Oh no. Sorry? No, every once in a while. There's actually a bug with rebooting. Oh, that's interesting. So it's back up and running right now. There we go. Okay, cool. Boom. Now we're serving outer curve. So it took a little while for that to get up and running. So let me tell you guys about a couple of last minute things here. We are going to skip ahead in the interest of time. You can do lots of really interesting things with those XDT files.
While you're skipping through, what was the bug you mentioned?
I'm sorry?
While you're skipping through, what was the bug you mentioned?
Oh man, they were right about Scotland. There was a bug that I mentioned. I got that. Say that again?
Oh, you mentioned there's a bug because you're not seeing.
Oh, yeah. So there's a bug with this button, restart. If you hit restart, they try to be clever and figure out if you really need to restart your website. And I did a lot of the times. And so it will say that it's restarted, but it didn't actually restart. So it's usually better, particularly if you're on stage like me, to hit stop and start. So if you ever restart your website and you don't see something happening, come and stop and start it. And there's a couple other places in Azure where you'll see restart, not just right there, and it's using the same API in the background, and those don't work either. So if you ever restart and it doesn't feel like it came back up, or you haven't noticed the change, stop and start. And apparently they've fixed that in the new portal, but I don't use the new portal. Yeah, so I have more that's available, and if you tweet me, I can tell you about it, or this code and the slide deck is already available. I recommend that you go and check that out. I also have a video of this presentation online that I can give you a link to if you wanted to see the last 10 minutes that I wasn't able to get through with you guys today. But does anybody have any questions? I know I went through a lot really quickly.
Do you do PowerShell with Kudu, the deployment steps?
Yes. Yeah, you can run whatever you want to as far as PowerShell or bash files. And so when I had that INI file that pointed to deploy.cmd, I can just change that to deploy.ps1 or whatever, and then I'm good to go. And my post-deployment actions, if you don't want to override the whole thing, you can upload a PS1 file and it's the exact same logic. It's looking for bat, CMD, or PS1. So you like a blue, you're good to go.
Could you write conditional logic in those based on things like the domain you were deploying to?
Totally. Yeah, you can do whatever you want to. I think that they probably would block you from formatting the hard drive, but other than that, and you're pretty much good to go. I know it does run in a sandbox, but that kind of logic is fine. And all of those variables are available to you, right? You can look at, when I showed you the environment variables in Kudu, right, when I went to this page here, all of these things are available to you inside of that script. So you can find out a lot of information about what site you're running, what your connection strings are, etc., etc.
How unit test friendly is? No, you mentioned you can run them, but if one fails, does it mean the rest do not go ahead, or how does it work?
That's all going to depend on how your unit test runner works. I know what I showed you, XUnit by default, it will run all of them, but if there's an error, it's done. It's going to report that there was an error, and my code is simplistic enough to say if there's an error, I don't want to deploy. The reality is, like I said, Kudu is kind of a CI server, but not really. So I'm not going to, like in TeamCity, I can see my unit test, it'll show me all of them, how long they took, I'll get green checks and red X's, and I can dig through the history. I'm not getting any of that. I'm getting what I've done with the log file. So it works as like a gate check, but that's about it.
Can you deploy from TeamCity to Azure websites?
Yeah, that's a great question. Can I deploy from TeamCity to Azure websites?
Yes.
You can. Yes is the answer. And I actually was talking to one of the devs that I work with. He's like, I hate Kudu. Kudu is stupid. And I'm like, you're crazy. He's like, well, I use TeamCity to build my application, and I have binaries, and I check my binaries into another repository of releases. That's what I want to deploy. I don't want Kudu to be building it. It's like, that's fine. Go change your SCM path and change how you do the copy. It will take the binaries that you built, move them over via source control, and then copy those to www root. You can skip every single step if you want to. And for that example, Gary, you don't even need to change the build script. You can just change some of the configuration options in your INI file. You're good to go.
But see, for that option, you would then be using Microsoft resources and this kind of build for it. Whereas in the setup he has currently, he would be using his own resources.
Yes. Yes, exactly. But maybe on his build server, he has some special component installed that he's hitting a licensing server that he's not going to be able to do on Kudu. Or maybe he has some complicated setup. You know, maybe he's installed something on his build server that he shouldn't have. You get pretty bare bones on Kudu. Anything that you can get into a NuGet, you're going to be good to go. But other than that, no. Like I actually ran into problems because Glintz works against MVC 2. It did at one point, and MVC 2 is not available on NuGet. Microsoft never put it there. So I put it there. And so that way I can use Kudu's NuGet get to get the dependencies that I need onto the box. And XUnit runners are available on NuGet, so that's good to go. IL merge is available there, so if you need to merge something, that's good to go. You might have to put something up on NuGet though, if it's not there.
So you have to be a public repository.
Does it no. No.
So you have the internal.
Yeah, if you have an internal NuGet and source control, neither of which need to be public. So in my examples, I'm using all public, but your configuration files will say how to authenticate with that. Now, if you don't want your credentials, so like if you have a NuGet server that's authenticated, you don't want to put those credentials in source control, that's fine. You go into the portal, and you come to configure, and you go to these app settings right here. That's going to load it in a second. And you would type in something like NuGet server username, put the username, NuGet server password, and put the password. And only the administrator would have access to this portal, but in your script, you can just reference that variable in parentheses. And then you can log in and do whatever you need to.
So Kudu's got access to all of those.
Kudu's got access to all of them, yes. So any secrets, so for example, on the GetGlins website, we connect using my Twitter account to Twitter to find out all the latest tweets about GitHub. But our website is open source, and I don't really want to expose my password for Twitter in our repository. So it uses a variable. I've come into here and I've said, Nik's Twitter password, and I put that in there, and that's what it uses, and we're good to go. And nobody can ever see the secret. Actually, we have people who have commit access to the repository. They can deploy the website and change it without ever getting access to my password, because we've given them permission to publish the source code, but not change settings in here. And what ends up happening is if there's an error, they're subscribed to an email using Zapiday, and they get the email with the error. So if the deployment fails, they know why, and we never even get called, which is great. Yay, open source community. All right, guys, you've asked some awesome questions. I would offer you glitch stickers, but they've already been shoved down your gullet, so you don't need any. Please, though, I know I didn't get to cover everything, and I apologize for that. Tweet me, I'll send out the link in a little bit, and you can watch the rest of this presentation online. I did not get to the coolest bit, unfortunately, but I think that you guys got plenty in the time that we had. Thank you, I appreciate it.